This week, we are finishing up a recent trilogy of just terrible stories with the tale of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. Just a terrible dude, and you're going to learn about him. It's Our Weird World.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and this week we are looking at the story of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah. Just one of those people who just wanted to be a terrible person, because apparently that was more fun than being a decent human being. So, shorter episode this week, but, you probably deserve a break after all of this terrible crap. So let's jump into it. Our story takes place in Worcester, Massachusetts, and it is absolutely pronounced Worcester. It's Worcester. It's pronounced Worcester. Worcester, Mass. Even though it's spelled Worcester, which is, more properly pronounced Worcester. But no, people from Massachusetts always talk like they have like a mouthful of mashed potatoes. And I hate to derail the whole episode right off the bat, but people always talk about how Southern accent's a dumb sound accent. But I will fight you on the notion that the Boston accent is beyond dumber sounding than a Southern accent. It's just, we're in Worcester, Mass. We're in Worcester, Mass, and, there's people all around, we have heart attacks, and, we got cars, a lot of cars here, and, we like burgers, a lot of burgers, mostly chowder, lots of chowder, clam chowder, not the New England chowder, that's gross, but the Boston chowder is much better, and, even though Tommy, he left the Pats, that's fine, because we still got the Sox. And okay, it's bad, and I hate it, and it's the worst. And Boston people are also equally, if not more, racist than Southern people. Go ahead, try to fight me on that. You're gonna find a lot of information that backs me up. Anyway, Worcester, Massachusetts was the birthplace of David Paul Brown. And I know what you're thinking. I thought this episode was about a guy named Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, and it is, and we're going to get to that. Anyway, David Paul Brown's life got off to a very inauspicious start when at age 7, he lured his 5-year-old neighbor into his basement. And that's not a good start. And he was going to show her the new Ouija board that he had gotten that could predict his future, which already, really bad. Apparently, the Ouija board predicted a future that involved David strangling that little neighbor girl to death. Fortunately, David's mother heard the little girl's screams and intervened before she could get murdered. So, crisis averted there, but, not a great start. 6 years later, David lured a 6-year-old boy over to an isolated hill, claiming that David wanted to go sledding with him. And, if David's definition of sledding was the same as sexual assault, then, everything's fine. But, obviously that's not okay. David also had a weird habit of just picking at his scabs and then sucking the blood out of them. And look, we all went to school. That's not, a controversial statement. And I don't know. I always knew of a kid who picked his scabs and sucked the blood out. And, I think everyone did. Everyone knew that kid in school. And if you were that kid in school, that's really weird and you're kind of gross. The problem, with what David did was that every time he sucked the blood out of his scabs, he would develop this weird orgasmic look on his face as he did it, and I never saw that. Just I would just see people pick a scab, suck the blood and be, just go on with their life. But David would just scratch, and oh yeah. I don't know why I had so much fun with that. Teachers repeatedly called David's mother about it because it was just really upsetting the other children around him. And that's totally understandable. I would get really upset too if someone did that. In March of 1975, David, who was still in high school at this point, impersonated a police officer and abducted an 8-year-old boy. Police eventually found David's car with David inside and the boy with him, and the boy was covered in blood, urine, and feces, but he was somehow still alive. Don't know how. And for whatever reason, David was only given probation for this assault, and he was let go. A few weeks later, David drove down to Hartford, Connecticut, and abducted a 9-year-old girl. When she began convulsing from the brutal assault that David was providing, he tossed her out of the car and drove home. One witness saw the entire thing happen and wrote down David's license plate, which eventually led to his arrest. But because people in Massachusetts are just clearly devoid of any sort of common sense or morality or basic human decency, not only did they release David from his probation and parole a year later, but they gave him a thank you letter for his cooperation. Like, sure, like I get, good behavior and all that, but for someone who has brutally and grossly assaulted 2 small children to then give him a thank you note, it's just like, I don't know. That's weird. In 1977, David pretended to be an FBI agent and convinced 2 boys at a movie theater to go with him on a ride. Of course, those boys were taken out into the woods and severely beaten. And as David strangled the 2 boys, he also thought it would be fun to flick the ashes of a cigarette on their bare skin. He then began jumping on one of the boys' chests, which he thought eventually killed that boy. And it's good to note here that at this point, David weighed 375 pounds. So he had no reason to doubt that jumping on a teenage boy's chest would absolutely kill him. When he thought that boy was dead, he took the other boy, tossed him in the trunk of the car, and sped off. Somehow, though, the boy that David had jumped on and sat on his chest somehow survived and told police, who then came and arrested David and actually rescued the other boy who was somehow still alive in the trunk. Like, how these 2 survived is absolutely miraculous. But rather than being let go again this time, David was given a maximum of 20 years in prison for attempted murder, and he was transferred to an insane asylum. And here we go. In 1984, David changed his name to Nathaniel Benjamin Levi Bar-Jonah because, and this is exactly true, this is 100% true, he wanted to know what it felt like to be discriminated against as a Jew. Like, this guy wasn't Jewish at all, but, he's a nutcase sitting in an insane asylum, and he's like, I only changed my name to something super Jewish, and I just want to feel what it's like to be a Jew. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Later that year, and I want to make sure I explicitly mention this judge's name because he's a complete idiot, Superior Court Judge Walter E. Steele ruled that the state of Massachusetts failed to prove that David was dangerous to society and actually signed his release from prison. All right? Like, I don't know, like, even if there was some, like, bureaucratic paperwork involved that got missed or messed up, like, you just look at what he was arrested and put in prison for, and at that point, like, he's a danger to society. But again, Superior Court Judge Walter E. Steele, who I don't know if he's still practicing or not, but he's a complete moron, signed his release because he said that the state of Massachusetts failed to prove that David was dangerous to society, even though it was really obvious that, David, who's now, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah, was a gigantic danger to society, like figuratively and literally. Like, the dude weighed nearly 400 pounds, and he also has just an extensive track record for assaulting children, like. And not just that, here's another detail that I haven't even bothered to tell you yet, but his psychiatrist in the asylum had written record that he fantasized about the taste of human flesh. But no, the state of Massachusetts hasn't clearly shown that David's a danger to society. Like, dude, come on. Anyway, on August 9th, 1991, David, or Nathaniel Bar-Jonah at this point, found a 7-year-old boy sitting by himself in a car. And Nathaniel walked up to the car, opened the door, and just sat down on the boy's lap. Although he was 100 pounds lighter, good for him for losing weight. He's only 275 pounds now. Although he was 275 pounds, the boy began suffocating to death beneath David's just fat body. When the boy's mother arrived, luckily, before the boy was dead, David jumped out of the car and ran away. A police officer who took the report recognized David's description from 15 years earlier, and the description probably included phrases like obese, jiggly neck, pervert mustache, utterly creepy. All of those very, if you look at pictures of Nathaniel Bar-Jonah online, is exactly what he looks like. I'm not just saying mean things about him just because I can. That's literally what he looked like. And so police were able to find him and arrest him. This time, Nathaniel was sentenced to probation in Montana. I don't know why he was just sent to another state. I guess Montana's just where we send our worst people. But on February 6th, 1996, 10-year-old Zach Ramsey was reported missing in Montana. His body has never been found, and here's why. Around that time, Nathaniel, who was somehow not in prison for any reason, started holding several cookouts at his home where he served burgers, chili, casserole, spaghetti, and meat pies. You could probably put the rest of this puzzle together. Even though an investigation of his financial records revealed absolutely zero grocery store purchases for an entire month following Ramsey's disappearance. Even more, people made several comments to David about the taste of the meat, but David claimed that he had just simply gone out and shot a deer. Oh no, it's just deer meat. It's deer spaghetti or deer meat pies or deer burgers. It's definitely not, human boy. Anyway, look, there's no way to definitively say that he killed the kid, chopped him up, and served him to his neighbors, but I think it's pretty obvious that that's what he did. Police ended up investigating Nathaniel for the murder and even found, here's the thing, they even found a list of boys' names, including Ramsey's name, on that list with the word died next to it. All right. This is how preposterous this gets. They then collected testimonies from his roommates who noted that David often brought Ramsey up in conversation. They even found bloody gloves and a coded notebook that ultimately revealed confessions to torturing and eating other children. But because the murder police sometimes are just so preposterously inept, they took all of that evidence from Nathaniel Bar-Jonah's house. All right. Notebooks full of kids' names, including Zach Ramsey, who was clearly chopped up and fed to the neighborhood. And they did absolutely nothing with it. They're just oh yeah, well, this is pretty interesting. It's pretty entertaining. Whatever. 3 years later, nothing happened. It's insane. 3 years later, Nathaniel Bar-Jonah was arrested again for impersonating a police officer because that's clearly a more serious offense than serving up little boy burgers. And when investigators searched his home, they found dozens of magazine clippings of young boys, a human bone, and recipes that included things like these are the names of recipes he had on there: French fried kid and little boy pot pie. Come on. How much more do you need? Apparently that was enough this time. And, just for good measure, they added several more charges. And Nathaniel Bar-Jonah was finally given a 130-year prison sentence and finally locked away for good. He was found dead in his cell on April 13th, 2008. And thank God that's the end of the story. Oh, God. I don't know, man. Just sometimes these stories get so frustrating because it's so obvious in hindsight, what should have happened. And then even reading and learning about, how the justice system worked and the reasoning that judges gave for setting people free, like it still doesn't make sense. And I have no idea what logic they used to justify that at the time, but whatever. Let's see what we learned today that the state of Massachusetts and Montana clearly did not.
What did we learn?
Number 1, don't give a Ouija board to your kids. Like, whether you believe in paranormal stuff or not, like there are a lot of stories around how using a Ouija board has gone very wrong for a lot of people. So, maybe just don't do that. If your kid gets a Ouija board as an adult, nothing you can do at that point. But, don't give it to a little kid. All right. Number 2, look, if you are curious about what it's like to be treated as someone who is of another race or an ethnicity or culture or whatever, don't just change your name. Like, first of all, that's just a really convoluted way to go about doing it. There's a lot of paperwork involved, and it's also pretty insensitive. Like, I'm not gonna, like, if I'm curious about, the plight of black people, I'm not going to go change my name to, Demarius or whatever. Like, no, I'm probably just going to go talk to some black people and be like, hey, what's up? What's new in your world? Or I guess, what's the same in your world as been for last, several decades. Anyway, number 3, hey, police. This is a special one for police. Look, if you're searching someone's home and you find a notebook where the kid that you're looking for, his name is in there, and the word died is next to it, and there's several, albeit loose connections, to the fact that the guy's house that you're in killed that kid and then chopped up his body and served that kid as like spaghetti and meat pies and steaks or whatever. At least question the guy. Maybe do some DNA testing, do a little forensics work. Don't just not do something about it. Idiots. Next week on Our Weird World, are you ready for just like some fun stories? We're going to have I get it. You're probably burned out with all of the depressing stuff. And so for the next couple of weeks, we're going to have just some nice, wacky stories. In fact, the next 2 weeks is going to start a 2-part series on some wacky wars that have been fought over the course of humanity. Part 1 next week will cover some just strange wars that were actually fought on American soil. We'll cover the Walton War, the Toledo War, the Honey War, and the Pig War. All of these are very real. I'm not making them up. So, if you like war, or at least, very loose use of the term war, you will enjoy the next couple of weeks of episodes. So thank you all for listening and hanging in there for these terrible topics these last couple of weeks. But remember, just keep telling all your friends and always keep it weird.